podcast Conversații despre viață și pierdere. Episodul 6. Chipurile durerii. Atâtea feluri de a pierde.
Hi, Liz. So happy to be offered with the chance to record a podcast with you. I'm here on behalf of Concordia Academia. Concordia Academia is a regional center for learning and innovation, addressing professionals and organizations actively involved in social and social medical field in Central Europe and also in Eastern Europe. The context of this podcast is given by an Erasmus Plus project called I Care, which is currently under implementation, and which gave Concordia Academia the possibility to work into developing two versions of a training program, one for caregivers and for families, and one for professionals actively involved in palliative care. Now, allow me to properly introduce you. Once again, for our dear audience, Liz Gleason is a psychotherapist, a specialist in grief and loss. Just for you to know that I took the permission to take some notes and I will follow them just to make sure that I will not miss any kind of significant information about you, your expertise, and your very valuable work. You are also an educator and a researcher. Your work is rooted in a deeply integrative and compassionate approach of healing. You have an extensive clinical and academic experience with supporting individuals navigating the complexities of loss. You have a master's degree in drama therapy, in psychotherapy and counseling, a second master's degree, and the third one in loss. And you are also the creator and the host of Shapes of Grief podcast, an internationally recognized platform that amplifies the voices of those working in grief care and of those who have experienced profound loss. And based on this, you actually build up Shapes of Grief, which is a complex and a comprehensive training program, an educational course for professionals seeking to deepen their understanding of grief and how to support others experiencing loss. For the audience, I noticed that you completed your name here with shapesofgrief.com. So anyone is free to look for you and to hear you out. If I'm not mistaken, and congratulations for this, you are currently pursuing a PhD at the Technological University of the Shannon, and your research explores the impact of the forest therapy on the grieving process, an important study that merges ecological approaches with psychotherapy type of care, right?
Yes, and actually I just did my first Viva this morning, which thankfully I passed to get through to the second stage of my PhD. Thank you, Irina. You're the first person I've told.
I think that your work is extremely valuable, not only for professionals and for the ones who are dedicating their entire time in serving others, in caring for others, in supporting others, but also for each and every single one of us who is experiencing grief and loss. That's our first step into starting the list of questions. Could you please share a few thoughts about loss?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about loss, many people think we're talking about bereavement. But of course, there's so many different losses that don't have a funeral. Loss really is the term we use for any significant change. It can be the death of somebody we love. It can also be the end of a relationship. It can be a separation, the end of a friendship. It can be the loss of a job, the loss of health, the loss of a career. You know, we go through many different losses throughout our lifespan, but we tend to only really recognize maybe bereavement-related losses much more so than other losses. But it's important to acknowledge that when we're talking about loss and the resultant grief, it's not just death, it's not just bereavement, and there's many invisible losses.
One of my friends called me this morning after our phone call last week, when she shared the great news. I mean, she bought a house somewhere quite close to the apartment she had at that time, and she was super thrilled, super enthusiastic about this. 1 week later, she called me saying that, or sharing with me that she had the feeling that she has done the biggest mistake of her life, and her entire family was dragged by her into this. And she was genuinely suffering and seeking for a bit of comfort, just because she shared with me the fact that what seemed to be at the beginning as a wise investment now turned out to be a bad idea. And she was feeling like having to deal with losing the memories, losing the most important years of her life in the place where the kids grew up. And It was really interesting to see within a week a complete change of perspective. Yeah.
And she realized that by embracing this new place, it would mean leaving something else behind. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice example. Yeah.
Yeah. A sort of a systemic way, because it happened this morning. And I kept this with me. I thought it might be a good example to slowly diving into the topic of grief, because now what we are about to talk about is more painful and much more sensitive than changing a house. Do we only speak of loss in the context of death? No, because even when we are talking about end of life, there is a period of time, many times, announcing this.
Yeah, when we're anticipating somebody's death, also, there's many losses before the ultimate loss, right? And with many illnesses also, we might lose our ability to walk, we might lose our speech, and we lose our capacity gradually with many illnesses. And each of them are preparing us, I guess, for the ultimate loss, which is death. But as I said to your previous question, there are many losses that don't result in a funeral, many losses that don't have a coffin, or that happen before somebody dies. In the case of, terminal illness as well, I always say that the grieving process usually starts the moment somebody gets a diagnosis. Your loss of certainty about the future, your loss of health, your shattering of assumptions about your future. And that's something people don't realize. They think we only begin to grieve when someone has died, but we can grieve for the peace and innocence that we had before a particular diagnosis happens.
You brought grief into discussion, and how grief is connected with the loss. How do people usually manifest the grief?
It's so different for everybody, Irina. It's very difficult to say it's just like this, because everybody grieves differently. But typical manifestations of grief are protest, yearning. We don't want something to happen, and it is happening, or it has happened. And so we're protesting that fact. There's many different theories that we have to consider when we're thinking about grief, and attachment theory is one of these. When we're strongly attached to somebody, we're wired to find them again, to keep them with us, to keep ourselves attached to them. And so a major manifestation of grief and grieving is that yearning for somebody in the way they were, or indeed just to have them alive again. And it's very painful because it's a yearning that you've no control over. But we almost think the more we protest, if I protest enough, it won't be true. It can't be true. But it is true. So protest, yearning, and then if it's after somebody has died, trying to make sense of it, meaning making, feeling sadness, feeling anger. The list is mighty. We have physiological responses, psychological responses, emotional responses, behavioral responses, spiritual responses, existential responses. It really is a deep, complex process where in some cases, and I'm always talking about some cases. We can't always say everybody, and it's always like this. In some cases, it's a whole rebuilding of who we know ourselves to be, because we no longer can identify who am I, what's the meaning of life, what's this all about? And we have to rebuild a new identity after our previous identity is fragmented and shattered by what we've been through.
It's about adapting yourself to a completely new reality.
It's adapting to a completely new reality that we don't want in many cases.
Exactly. Yeah. We are actually profoundly rejecting. How was it for you to learn how to consist people being confronted with this kind of huge challenge? How was it for you to find mechanisms, ways, words, methods, hugs? How difficult was this for you as a process, as a growing into a professional type of process?
Yeah, I'm still learning. I'm still in that process. And I think for every single person who presents in front of me, it's a different process. It's always a different requirement. I believe strongly in understanding the physiology of grief, understanding what's going on in the body and how to support that. Because, often when people present in practice for support, there's a lot of dysregulation happening in their bodies. So, for example, their eyes can look terrified, startled, in shock over what's happened. And their breathing is from here up. They're breathing from the top of their chest. They're tight. They're scared. If we go back to attachment theory, and we think, of this mechanism that keeps us with our loved ones so that we stay safe. And then suddenly there's a rupture in that attachment, either through illness or through death. And that rupture causes a lack of safety, a lack of stability, a lack of predictability. So that's one of the primary issues that need to be addressed, in my opinion, when we're supporting somebody. It's very difficult to process from the top down, from your brain, process a loss and make sense of a loss if your body is feeling so unsafe. So, sometimes people might come at a point where they are able to process, and then others might come at a point where their body is still very much shook up. So it depends on when people come and what support they need. What stage of the process, if you like, that they're in. So my response to people is very different, depending on when they present. But if people come early on in those acute weeks of grief and their grieving is still very much manifested in their bodies, I will often take a body-based approach to support, encouraging them to breathe, to allow the tears to come, helping them to feel safe in the room by co-regulating with my breath, my words, the speed of my voice, the tone of my voice, even where I put my body. So in most usual sessions, I will be sitting opposite somebody. If I have a sense that the physical body needs more support because maybe it's earlier on and they're still very shook up physically, I'll often sit beside them on the sofa, sit near them, gradually getting closer maybe as the session goes on, or even inviting, asking them, is it okay if I put a hand on their back or a hand on their arm, which can help to regulate. And as always, I'm reading the room, I'm reading the person, does it need this? Does this situation need this? Or does it need me just to sit back and offer space? So all the time it's reading what's happening in their body, what's needed at this point of their process. And for every person, that's different. Some people just need to come and talk. And I just don't have to weigh and let them do that, trying to make sense. Others want to come and just cry. Others come and they're genuinely scared and terrified and really just need that safe container built for them. That takes time and it's different for everybody. I think what's most important is for me absolutely leaving everything, my preconceived ideas behind, and just going in, listening with every part of me, not just my ears, listening with the heart, listening with my eyes, listening with my ears, listening with my breath and responding accordingly. And it's not so much listening to the story. The story doesn't even really matter. It's more tuning into, here's somebody who's suffering tremendously. And what does this suffering person need right now? That's a skill that's very important and useful, I think, for people as well.
So always the question is, how can I really support the other? What does he, she really needs now?
What is needed right now, as opposed to fancy words or fancy skills do I have? How can I say the right thing? It's really not about me at all. It's almost like, we're in an act of service to this person. And I think really honoring the space that they're in and acknowledging the space that they're in is huge for so many people. Just that validation of acknowledging their loss, that validation of their emotions, normalizing their experience, maybe saying things like, this is really common, I've seen this before, certainly being really comfortable with their tears and their grief. Like when someone starts to cry, which is common, I'll often say, that's fine, let that come, that's really good. You were saying about your husband, keep going. So it's like almost just totally normalizing that expression of grief again, to make it a safe space, a safe container for all of that expression to happen in the room.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being so specific when sharing with us about your professional experiences. I mean, that's really helpful. I also wrote down the idea of the physiology of grief. How does it manifest? I have a question which was not initially considered, but a lot of professionals are about to watch this material, and I truly do understand, also based on the nature of my own profession, that the focus on what the other really needs. But I have also the second perspective, because I'm absolutely sure that it happened many times, to find it's really difficult to manage the situation. Have you experienced lack of capacity to support the other? Have you experienced the fear that you are not able to respond in a proper manner? Have you experienced the anxiety of not knowing what to do? That's a question from my...
Yeah. we have to be so humble in what we think we're doing there. We can't fix it. The worst has happened. There's nothing I can say to bring their person back. So it's acknowledging and accepting this has happened. The worst has happened for this person. My job is not to make this better. My job is not to fix this. My job is to sit alongside this person so that they're not alone for this hour, and that they can feel a hand on their back, whether that's literal or metaphorical. My job is to accompany them. When we lose someone we love, the only possible balm is love. To hold a space that is loving, and I suppose more from a professional capacity, we might say compassion. How do we show the compassionate heart? And, I think also to be grief trained is really, really important. But grief training involves knowing when to shut up as much as knowing what to say or how to say it or how to be with somebody. I think the minute we start to try to be clever, to make them feel better or to fix the situation, we've really lost something. Grieving isn't a problem. It's not a problem. It's normal. It's a normal response to loss. And I think the moment we treat it like a problem, as something we have to fix, we've got it wrong.
Yes, thank you so much for these thoughts. I will share with you the fact that we in Concordia Academia are extremely interested in developing the culture of compassionate communities, also from a professional perspective, building the compassionate professional communities. And that's always an issue. What is the best thing to say? What's the best thing to do? How can I properly accompany the person in need? And I'm not exclusively talking about the psychologists. I'm also talking about the social workers or other type of care of caregivers. And we have the tendency to forget that it's simple as it is. I mean, you only have to be there. And that's the most important thing, to be there with your heart, with your spirit, to be there for the one in need. And it's more than enough.
Well,
less is more, right?
I beg to differ a little bit, because I think it's right and we need more. So obviously a compassionate, kind presence is really essential to help create safety, but also grief literacy is really important. It's really important to know what is normal in grief. It's important to be able to bear that alongside somebody, and to be able to do that, we need to understand our own losses and our own grief, and to understand our own responses in our own bodies and minds and hearts. We need to understand what is a normal adaptive response to loss, so that we can also understand when it isn't, because sometimes it isn't. It's problematic and it's going to cause issues for somebody down the line. So there is an element of grief training that's absolutely necessary. It isn't just about being a compassionate presence, although I would argue that's possibly one of the most important skills. But we need to understand what is a normal response to grief. We need to understand that a grieving trajectory involves loss orientation, where I'm feeling the loss, I'm feeling the pain of separation, I'm fully in the depth of my grief. And then maybe 10 minutes later, I'm trying to push forward, I'm trying to restore, I'm trying to get dinner on the table, I'm planning a funeral, I'm not crying at all, I'm keeping things together. So we need to understand that there's movement between these two sides. We need to understand things like there's no stages of grief. There isn't a beginning, a middle, and an end. we need to understand things like the spectrum of possible responses. Some people will say, okay, I'm really going to miss my dad. I loved him. Thanks, Dad, and get on with their lives. Other people will be on their knees for years in intense suffering. So we need to understand why this happens, how we grieve, what determines whether you walk away unscathed or whether you're on your knees for years, and how, as professionals, can we support that? So, I don't want to make it sound too simplistic, but at the same time, basic grief training, like 30 hours of basic grief training, can really bring a lot to the table. And I think it's really essential for people to, understand their own loss, so that you can go into the room as a clear container, ready to accept and hold whatever you're presented with. And then B, to have the skills to work in this area, or at least know your limitations. So, a basic amount of compassion, a basic amount of grief theory will help most people. And that's really useful. But if I'm a psychotherapist, and we can think here of the adult bereavement care pyramid, which tells us that everybody who is bereaved needs acknowledgement of their loss, validation of their feelings, a compassionate response, and information and normalization about the grief response. So at a very basic level, as professionals, we need to be able to do that. But we also know that about 40% of people need more. They need a group, they need a professional, maybe a counselor, psychotherapist, maybe more. And if that's us, then we have an obligation to be able to meet the different needs of those people, the more advanced needs of those people. So at a very basic level, basic grief literacy, and then additional grief training if we are supporting people beyond that basic level.
Yeah, because we owe the others professional accountability. Yeah,
100%.
That's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a real problem. I don't know what it's like in Romania, Irina, but certainly in Ireland, and I believe in America and the UK as well, very few professionals do a proper grief training. And this is difficult because somebody goes for grief counseling or grief support, and they say, they were very nice, they were very compassionate, but it didn't work. And maybe it's not that grief counseling doesn't work. Maybe it's more, the person isn't qualified.
Lack of information, exactly, and professional skills. Yeah, I completely agree. And it was actually a very relevant discussion on this topic, even in our team, when building up the pool of trainers and future professionals involved in the training program we are about to deliver, starting with this season in Concordia Academia. And this was exactly the most relevant matter: how to bring in the complementarity in between the professional profiles of the future trainers, and how to make sure that, at least from Concordia Academia perspective, they are well equipped and well informed when it comes to future responsibility they will have to deal with. So I completely agree. That's what I said. That's why I said that it's a matter of professional responsibility and accountability, and we have to take it very seriously into consideration.
Yeah.
The next question was significantly anticipated by you, and we've already been through it somehow. How can we support someone who experienced a loss? So we've been there. How can we live with grief? On the other hand, from the other perspective, how can we live, we as people experiencing grief? What helps us regaining balance after a significant loss?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's, again, the response is different for everyone. What helps us after a loss? accepting the reality of the loss is essential. That's William Worden's tasks of mourning. It's accepting and not evading the grieving process. It's messy. It can be very scary, but essentially allowing the feelings to come, allowing ourselves to feel the pain of grief is really, really essential. A lot of people try to find all sorts of ways to avoid it, to skip it, to go around it rather than go through it. So I think allowing
human nature, right?
The more we can just allow ourselves to experience the process, which can be exhausting and scary, but really allow ourselves to go through it is essential. Obviously, depending on the loss as well, support is really important. Some of us have that naturally in our communities. Some of us have to pay for that, to get that from a professional. Also accepting that our life, it's not really about resilience. It's not really about bouncing back to where we were. Sometimes it's about reconstructing a whole new reality. It's before the death and life after the death. And that's quite shocking for people. They just want to be back to normal, back to where I was, bounce back to the way life was. But often it isn't about bouncing back, but more adapting to what is. And there can be a bit of denial around that for a period of time. But I think when we're trying to support ourselves in any way, we think about all the different ways that grief impacts us. It impacts my body. So how do I support my body? By giving myself enough sleep. But equally, if I'm sleeping loads, giving myself some movement and some air, trying to just really support what my body needs. Supporting the meaning-making process by telling the story again and again and not being scared to do that with a group of, trusted friends, allowing myself to feel the pain of grief. A lot of the advice that's out there is almost really encouraging social isolation. I think you do what you feel like and, don't do anything that you don't want to do. But with people I support, I'm more inclined to give them a gentle little push. And what if you said yes? What's the worst that could happen? You could come back after an hour if you don't want to stay there all evening. I think people really need that encouragement to really engage with life again, if it serves them, And I do this because in most cases people say, I really didn't want to go. I was dreading it, but actually it was really good for me. So we know that our social circle shrinks, our comfort zone shrinks. And sometimes without a little bit of encouragement, we don't re-engage ever in some cases. So I do try to just sort of play with that and see what people are able for. And then particularly if it is serving them, to certainly encourage that as well. So yeah, we need to think about all the different domains and where we're impacted by loss and support yourself in all of those different domains as well.
I love this idea of reconstructing a whole new reality, and very grateful for pointing out ways of really taking care of us when we are grieving, acknowledging the fact that we are really suffering and we have to take care of us. Even if we have the tendency to reject this, to completely reject this, pretending that we don't care, not even pretending, but acknowledging the fact that in that very particular moment we simply don't care. I think that's the main type of help we really need, to be reminded.
It goes beyond not caring as well, but it's almost like in this suffering, I am connected to my deceased loved person, my deceased loved one, that there's somehow some comfort in the suffering and the grief because it's connected. It's the energy of my loss. It's connecting me to my loss. It's all I have of them. The grief is all I have left of them. I don't want to get better. I don't want to be okay. I hear that
This
often.
keeps me connected. Exactly.
Yeah. And often it's, there's a lovely poem by an Irish author, John O'Donoghue. I think it's called For Grief. And he talks about sort of the grieving process beautifully, poetically throughout his poem. And at the very end, he says, and then in the end, you come back to your heart where you find your loved one, where they've been all along. But with people in acute grief, it's like they can't access this loving connection until the grief is really processed. And often it's because there's been an event or a death that's taken over, a sickness that's taken over, which is really taking over all of their thoughts. It's the memory of the death. It's the days leading up to it. It's the difficult treatments. And this isn't processed properly. So it's just very alive in them, or the aftermath of the death. And what I find is when people are given a chance to process that, process the sickness, process the illness, process the death or the circumstances of the death or the aftermath of the death, it's almost like when the noise of that is processed and settles down, they're able to access other memories again. They're able to access love again and fun times and memories. And it gives them an alternative way to relate to their loved one other than just via the suffering and the pain of loss.
I personally experienced these situations in which friends of mine told me I had so much time to get used with the idea of losing the one I love, and still I've reacted or I acted as I was never prepared for this. How do we prepare ourselves?
So many people are not prepared, even when they're in hospice, even when they're under palliative care, even when they know that somebody is not going to get better. The amount of times I hear somebody say, I thought we had more time. We were going to talk about it, but I thought we had more time. I think as well, for some people who are actually dying, it's very hard for them to discuss this with the people they love. I believe, and I don't know what the research is on this, but I believe that more people don't talk about it than people who do talk about it. Even though we might know for a long time that somebody is very ill, what does that time look like? That time is often filled with hospital appointments, doctor's appointments, getting to a treatment, going through a treatment, surviving the aftermath of that treatment, recovering from that treatment, going to an appointment to get the results of that treatment, getting suggestions for the next treatment, preparing for the next treatment, going in for the next treatment. Like, it's a highly activating environment. It's not like, in most cases, people are sitting back, processing what's happening or what's about to happen. In most cases, certainly that I've seen or supported, people are living through intense sympathetic dysregulation where they're in fight or flight mode. Their very core and well-being is threatened by what's happening, and they are just trying to survive day to day to day. And the people who get a chance to accept what's happening and process that and actually address it and discuss it are few. And it would be lovely if we could do it more. And maybe it's the medical model that's preventing that, because it's really a really beautiful thing when we can sit with somebody without the gagging order. I see this so often. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about how ill they are. He doesn't know she's dying, or she doesn't know I'm dying.
That's very much present in our culture. That's very much present.
Yeah. And I think that causes a tremendous amount of suffering because our emotions aren't able to flow freely. We're not able to be authentic. We've got the mask on, the gagging order is on. I don't know what I'm allowed to say. I don't know what I'm not allowed to say. I'm second guessing. I'm protecting you. You're protecting me. Everybody's lonely. We need to change this, I think.
It's always about this phrase, if I knew, I would have done it completely differently.
Mm.
And you actually knew. It happened to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I've said it so many times. If someone told me, if I knew, I would have done it completely differently. But actually, the truth is that I knew.
There's different kinds of knowing, Irina. You can know with information, which is very different to knowing through experience. So my mother died, 20 years ago? I knew she was dying, but I hadn't ever experienced that, so I knew nothing. And when I look back on that, I wish I had known more, because I would have brought her out of the hospital as she wanted, and I would have brought her home. So I knew she was dying, but I didn't know the experience. Fast forward, 15, 17 years later, and my father is dying, and I know he's dying, but I also know with my full body, because I have lived it already. So I keep him home. I don't send him to hospital. I reject the doctor's invitation to call an ambulance. I keep him home. I care for him. He has the death he wanted. We're all there. It's perfect. So the only reason I could do that is through the experience of the first one. So we must really be gentle with ourselves, because we can know someone is going to die, and yet it still shocks us. It's still so surreal. It's existential. It's a phenomenal thing when somebody is born, new life. And it's a phenomenal thing when somebody dies. It's beyond most of our day, for most of us, beyond most of our day-to-day experience. It's otherworldly, it's holy, it's really special and such a privilege. And not everybody has that opportunity in their lives. And some of us do and get a chance to learn. But most of us are just trying to stay present and get through the next day. So I think we need to be really gentle with ourselves. It's not Hollywood. In most cases, death can be really underwhelming. And I think sometimes we have to manage our expectations of healing everything and fixing everything. And death can be really underwhelming. That's it.
I'm personally very much touched by what you just said. And I'm grateful, because it was a bit of healing for me as well while listening to you. So thank you. That's why I chose to switch to let's say, a more pragmatic approach now, just to save myself from the situation. As I said, for our audience, you are currently pursuing a PhD at the Technological University of the Shannon, and I was super interested. I am super interested in understanding more about the forest therapy you are currently studying, which, as introduced at the very beginning, it's an important study that merges ecological approaches with psychotherapeutic care. Can you share a bit more about the forest therapy? It was actually the very first time when I heard about it, when we met in the University of Leiria a couple of months ago, and I'm highly interested in understanding more about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, forest therapy, I guess it's been around forever, right? People living in the forest and being part of the forest. But the term forest therapy was coined, I think it was in the 80s in Japan by the Minister for Agriculture at the time. And in Japan in the 80s, I guess with the rise of the technological revolution, they saw a significant rise in mental health issues and suicide in the country. And a very forward-thinking Minister for Agriculture said, well, if putting people inside on screens is causing significant detriments to health, what about we bring them outside and off screens and into nature? And I think Japan has covered like 70% forest, something like that. So a lot of studies have been done in Japan on forest bathing or forest therapy, which is an intentional process. It's not just a walk in the woods. It's a very intentional connecting with nature, bringing us into our senses, into our taste, our sight, our smell. When we're brought into our senses, we're brought into the present tense. So we're not sort of living in anxiety about the future or yearning for the past. We're brought into the present tense. And the results, I suppose, in various studies in Japan and elsewhere were really profound in terms of improving people's health on all sorts of different domains, improving rumination, improving sleep, improving blood pressure, immune response, cardiac health. The results were immense. And so when we know grief then is a physiological experience, our blood pressure can be raised. We can actually suffer cardiac arrest. We can suffer stroke. We can have a compromised immune system. We can lie awake at night ruminating, trying to make sense of things. We can suffer from ulcers and rheumatoid arthritis and ulcerative colitis, all of these decrements to health that can follow a bereavement. And then we look at all of these salutogenic benefits of forest therapy. I thought, well, why not bring these together? As we know, as we've discussed from grieving, it's so much more than just a physical response. It's an emotional response. It's a psychological response. It's meaning making. It's piecing back together parts of ourselves. It's a profound, time-consuming, psychologically heavy process that we have to go through. How do we do that in a busy world where you have to get up, get the kids ready for school, go to work, you show up as if nothing has happened, get through your workday? How do we do that? It's almost impossible. So my idea was to create this container in the forest, in an environment that doesn't have all of these external pressures, essentially so that the process can happen, so that there's space for that. So I brought a group of bereaved people out every week for 6 weeks to a local forest. I hired a forest therapist and, brought them through this 6-week process. And it was magical. It was really, really, really interesting, the things that happened for people there. Instead of giving them pills for their insomnia or pills for their, anxiety, or sending them to a therapist that they can't afford, to try and regulate their physiological and emotional and psychological response to loss, the forest acted as the regulator, the steady presence of the forest, the dependable presence of the forest, the smells, the sights, the containment, offered a really good regulatory presence. So that essentially is what I'm studying for my PhD. As I said, I just passed my first Viva this morning, Viva.
And I was the first to know.
You were. So I'll be starting a new study now, recruiting in the autumn and doing a new study in the spring, to really hone in on, that identity reconstruction, that meaning making, that has to happen, and how that can be facilitated in a forested environment, better than in our concrete jungle, right?
Exactly. But what a jungle. What a jungle. Thank you so much for sharing about your study. Is really, really interesting. A reconfirmation of the strong influence of the nature. We are approaching the end of our discussion, for which we are really grateful. Looking forward to plan of a following one. What's the most important message you would like to share with someone who is just experiencing grief? What would you say to them?
This is normal. This is really, really hard. And this is normal. This is a normal response to loss. You're not broken. It won't be this way forever. If someone has just lost someone, you are in the epicenter of the grieving experience. There is hope. You know, it's a personal journey of learning, who do I have to become now to be able to carry this loss and make it part of my life experience? You know, and to somebody who's supporting that grieving person, I would say this isn't about you. This is about them. How do you put down your own needs for a moment to be able to show up for somebody else and just accompany them, be alongside them? There can be magic in that. Showing up again and again and again consistently, just presence can be tremendous help. And if you're a professional, please make sure that you're getting your grief training at shapesofgrief.com or elsewhere. But get your grief training, learn about this. There's a huge amount of information and knowledge. Compassion is wonderful. It's not enough. You know, it's an essential.
You need to have skills. Yeah. Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your compassion in this hour. And thank you for how attentive you are, for all the details that build you up as a professional. Thank you once again, and looking forward to having a second discussion with you. All the very best and good luck in your extremely valuable work.
Thank you so much, Irina, and thank you for addressing this really important topic and bringing information to your colleagues in Romania. We need everybody spreading the word, and the whole world needs to learn about this, particularly in our current political climates. You know, we're bearing witness to so much grief, so much loss, so much suffering. You know, this is information that each one of us needs. I think it's impossible to be alive as a human today and not be grieving with all that we are seeing.
Exactly.
So it's really important. So thank you for starting these conversations in Romania also.
I think you close our discussion with a very sensitive type of contextualization by bringing into our discussion the things which are currently happening in our countries, in our world, in our jungle, as you mentioned. So we all have to deal with grief and loss at a certain point, but the reality is harder than this, and it's happening next to us. So once again, thank you for your great contribution to our work, and count on us to spread the word as much as we can about shapes of grief and about how important it is to keep a high level of professionalism in whatever you decide to do. All the very best, and take good care.